Hello, everybody. Welcome to the April OCC. This is day 2. This is semi-final Saturday. We've got 2 semifinals for you here today to determine who will make it to the grand finals, who will be competing for 3rd place to get those sweet, sweet Officer Club points to qualify for the first ever Officer Club Championship Ultimate coming up next week. I am your host, Christo. I am joined by potentially the hardest working person in KARDS who's doing double duty. Jking going to be casting his own match while he plays, not while he plays in his own match, but doing double duty. We got Jking here with us. We also have Berto here who is doing the complete opposite and decided to take the month off. So we have got
the laziest player, so to say.
Berto always catching strays.
Berto, I thought of putting that out there, and I'm like, I'm not going to be that mean. I like Berto. I'm not going to call him out for being lazy, but I thought the dichotomy of that was just too sweet to pass up. So we're going to have a great time here with you today. We're going to have the semifinals. So let's go ahead. We'll bring up the bracket and take a peek at exactly what type of games you're going to see. So Jking versus Jinlun in the first semifinals. Jking getting to call his own match. We did it last month with Berto, and the response was so overwhelmingly positive. We thought we'd bring back that feature again, getting to see a little bit into the thoughts of Jking as he goes through his matchup. And then we got Moy versus No15 in the bottom portion of that semifinals. No1 probably in a good spot for the ultimate. Moy was just outside that top 8 with that win in the quarters. Probably put himself in a good spot as well. So of these 4 players, Jinlun probably needs this win more than anybody. Jking had mentioned yesterday during the quarterfinals when we were chatting about it that anybody competing in the top 8 could theoretically qualify for the ultimate if they got enough points. Jking, does Jinlun need to win this all to be able to make it in?
So by this point, because of the way the rest of the bracket has worked out, I believe at this point, all of the 4 players left in the tournament are pre-qualified. At this point, I think the top 8 is solidified, and now we're just fighting for seeding.
Easy peasy then. No problem at all. We didn't get a chance to look at Jinlun in the quarterfinals because unfortunately their opponent had to pull out. So let's bring up their player profile here and get to know Jin just a little bit better. 361 total matches, 75% win rate. Another very efficient player here, finishing 4th. So not having to go through that qualifier process. Any specific thoughts about Jinlun and their place in the KARDS community?
I remember the very first tournament we saw Jinlun in. He was new player on the block, and he brought Japan-Poland Legions Control, and it was a deck that, essentially no one had really seen before, no one had really played before, and he played it to such an insane degree. I was incredibly impressed, and I mean, that was almost a year ago now, and since then, in my mind at least, he's certainly become a regular, if not necessarily a regular appearance in top 8, a regular player who could make top 8s. He's regularly making top 38s. If he's not in the top 6, he's playing in the qualifiers, he's putting in the hours, and I'm not that surprised to see his favorite card is To the Last Man. His Japan control days are a bit behind him in terms of the meta, but he's still remembers his roots.
Well, while talking about being impressed by Jinlun's play and Jinlun's decks, why don't we bring them up right now and you can walk us through them?
Yeah, so his first deck here is Britain-Japan, and you see the Type 94s, you see the Suisse, and you think, oh, it's just another air list. This is not just another air list. We've seen 4 Brit air lists in this tournament. We've seen 2 Brit discard lists in this tournament. This is something completely different. This is the return of Britain-Japan Pin. It's a deck that's been in and out of the meta, never too popular. It's notoriously difficult to play, and I mean, Jinlun is showing that he is not afraid to bring it, and we talked about at the beginning of this tournament a potential 3rd British deck that's not discard, it's not air, it doesn't fall into these counter matchups, and Jinlun bringing Britain Pin, maybe this is it. The idea of the deck is essentially you just delay everything your opponent does, you keep all of their units pinned for as long as possible, and then you try to finish them off with Commonwealth. And, I mean, it's a control deck, but it requires very different thought processes. It almost plays like a combo deck in some ways. And then we see his second deck, is the Soviet Japan self-damage. Now, this is a deck we have not seen for a couple of months since the nerfs to 34th guards. So the fact that he is bringing it again, I think this lineup was designed to counter US-German frontline. The pin deck, very strong against frontline, and we see even in the deck itself, he's running 4 copies of Naval Operation rather than what's been more popular lately in these pin type of decks with 4 copies of Supply Shortage, the Naval Operation calling out specifically frontline. Self-damage, amazing against frontline. And then his third deck to round out his lineup is just Feigned Retreat Jagro, a very solid deck that's going to go well into frontline. It's going to go well into, I mean, essentially anything. That's really the reason people bring this deck, is it doesn't get hard countered by a whole lot other than self-damage, and he's the only self-damage in the tournament. So very solid lineup for him, looking to counter US frontline. And if I recall correctly, I believe every single player in this tournament other than him has US frontline. So quite the call out.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Almost being very, very thoughtful in the fact that, you know what, people have been teching against air for the longest time. Let me adjust that a little bit since, you know, there's been a few less air decks in this event, but we have definitely seen the frontline piece. So very curious to see how this fared against your lineup, Jking. Berto, why don't we have you dissect or, you know, trash Jking's lineup? Your choice.
Yeah, so the interesting thing about Jking's lineup is it appears he forgot to submit a British deck. You can't see it anywhere here. I mean, that's a clear mistake. But the rest of these 3 decks, they look all right. He also forgot Bombing Raid in his Jagro, grew in a Panzer 3H. Maybe he doesn't own the card? We'll see how that works out for him.
That has got to be potentially my favorite analysis of any deck lineup I have ever seen. So yeah, thank you for that, Berto. I'll even, you know, as a reward for that, I'm gonna have you skip the whole concept of asking you what you think these players are gonna ban. I'll let you off the hook because that was so amazing. We will bring up the bans, but I figure because we have Jking here, why not just have Jking kind of walk us through his mindset when he decided what the ban was? So instead of us guessing, we can just have him tell us exactly what happened.
So Jinlin's 3 decks. He has Jagro, which is essentially never going to get a ban. It's a deck that can beat anything, but it's a deck that can get beat by anything. Its win rate is close to 50 into most decks, which is why it's popular, but also why it's not really going to get a ban. And like I mentioned, Jinlin looks like he's targeting US frontline, so I'm expecting him not to ban my frontline deck, which means my frontline deck, there's 2 options which are quite good into it. There's the pin deck, and there is self-damage. Self-damage is also good into my Jagro deck, so I ban self-damage since it's very good into 2 of my decks, which I'm not expecting him to ban either.
Right on. So let's bring up the bans. So we will see, you know, Jking banning the self-damage, and then you get your Soviet France deck banned.
Yep, this is about what I expected, and it's very good that I banned the Soviet deck then, since the self-damage into Jagro, not a fun matchup. And game 1, I decided I'd bring US. This is going to be the harder deck to win with, and I expected Jinlin to start with Jagro just because that's usually a comfortable deck to start with. Sort of, if you lose with it, that's perfectly fine. You just bring it again. If you win with it, you're up on you got the advantage, whereas starting with the pin deck, if you lose with it, you're feeling very, very bad. So Jagro versus frontline, this is a pretty even matchup, I would say.
So since it's an even matchup, are you expecting kind of the first couple turns to really define sort of what the kind of what the tempo of the matchup's going to look like?
Definitely. The front line is very much looking for 30 seconds. If they can get it, Red Devils. Here, I full mulliganed, and
None of it.
yeah, this is not the hand you want. But on the other side, Junlin's hand, it's good. He's got the Errado, he's got the Despot already. However, it's not the most aggressive start, so it's not going to be incredibly punishing for my significantly slower start. And another 5th Rangers pickup, that's all 3. If I can make it to turn 4 without being completely lost on board, this is gonna turn around, but...
Yeah, it does seem like Jinlun really mulliganed for the idea that you are going to have this early game. So it's more reactive rather than a hand that punishes you for missing on your development. So that does definitely keep you in the game here.
And the patrol pickup, very good on curve to take out the Akita, stop the destruction effect, lets him keep the Whirlwind. That is quite a very good draw. And here, Jinlun, he can draw with the Erato, but that does... I mean, his curve here is a little awkward. He can go for just the Martyr, hope it 1-for-1s with the Whirlwind. He can go for Erato, Cavalry, and Type 93 if he just wants to get out all the 1-drops.
I'm surprised we don't see the Erato 15th Type 93. Like, it's a good opportunity to get it down. Surely you can get a single draw off of Martyr pretty much at any point in the game. I'm a little surprised.
So here, I go for the 5th Rangers just because I'm thinking this Martyr's a threat, but I can always take it out with the patrol in the future. I want to start playing on curve and just hope my opponent doesn't have 2 of these 2-attack blitz units to just double trade into 5th Rangers. The Akita pickup is especially strong. He could have just done Desperate Measures Cavalry Regiment to take it out, draw a card, but Akita actually works out even better because this is going to potentially let him clear the board and draw 2 cards.
Yeah, and I would think you would want to Akita first, because if it reduces the chance that you hit the Whirlwind down to 33%, but it does mean that you have an increased chance that you can at least move it up, so that you, Jking, would have to trade rather than get to the backline and be able to target the Martyr. So yeah. I think that could have been done a little better. But...
Yeah, I would agree with you. And Radiant Brigade top deck, very strong here. He is going to want to play Erato first. It will get pinned. However, you're getting the draw.
That's the main thing it's there for. Feigned retreat, very nice.
And with Dina and Shiden in hand, you're likely not going to be attacking or moving with this Whirlwind on the following turn anyways. So if you weren't going to spend the credits on it, pin doesn't really matter.
With this Whirlwind?
Erato. Erato, Whirlwind, basically the same card.
They're both German to me, yeah. Ooh, Sendai is really strong against 5th Rangers. When the 5th Rangers comes back from Sendai, it doesn't get that deployment effect, so it'll always be a 4/4 with 4 operation cost, which is obviously not really what you want to be using.
Yeah. Sendai by far the best answer in Jaguar to 5th Rangers, and 5th Rangers by far the best target in the US Frontlines deck for Sendais. And,
unfortunately, nothing to use with the extra 2 credits, though, because the only thing you can do is play Desperate Measures, obviously terrible, or to play Type 93, which opens you up to be worse into Stars and Stripes, especially, and into Strategic Bombing as well.
With the second M4A1 draw here, I mean, these cards were designed for the discard, or not designed, the cards were put in for the discard matchup. This is very much not the discard matchup, and a handful of 4-drops on 7 credits does not feel great.
Oh man, are you really going to bounce the Sendai to get the 2/2? Oh man.
Yep. Play half-track on Sendai just to force the Jaguar deck to spend another 4 credits replaying the Sendai.
Although it does go on a better unit now. You got the value, increasing the up cost. Now Jinlun gets to play it on the M4A1. Which can't be something Jking loves to see.
It most certainly is not, but now now there is room to take the front line. A lot of my cards are based around 4, so with 4 I can play out both of these units in hand. I can push up and play a unit from hand. I can just push up an 8/8. Having the 8 credits here and a clear front line is really what I wanted. However, Stars and Stripes draw, it's a little too tempting not to just fully clear the board. Kill the Sendai, get everything back, get rid of Signal.
I was kind of hoping for the 8/8 to the front line play, and just to say, like, You wouldn't have another Sendai, would you? Nah.
And Dina finding exactly what Jinlun wants, 2 blitz units, get pressure into the front line. Because with this feigned retreat in hand, he knows he's going to have access to the rest of his deck. So just slow the US frontline deck down as much as possible. So that when you play this feigned, you're just going to be able to flood the board. The only way for the feigned retreat deck to lose after feigned comes out in this matchup is if the US frontline deck already has a big enough established board. If you play feigned and they play a we can do it on 5 or 6 units, and suddenly it's going to take several turns to trade out the board, even if you're drawing through your entire deck. But if the frontline is clear and you play feigned, you're going to win 99% of the time.
And Jking, I imagine you're deciding whether or not you want to trade out the bicycle, or... Well, I suppose you always want to take out the bicycle, so then it's if you want to deal with the infantry, if the 2 defense matters. Is that in case of another 35T?
Also, which units to attack into with, because Jinlun does run bombing raid, and the M4A1 cannot be targeted by orders. So it does raise some interesting questions about how best to trade. And here Jinlun goes for a play which confuses me as much now as it confused me at the time he did it in the game. He does Shiden push to the front line using the blitz to get it up there, and then relying on the ambush to keep it from just getting immediately traded out. It can be removed on board. And I mentioned previously that you don't want US to be in the front line when you play feigned, which might have been what was going through Jinlun's head here. However, yeah, I win the very, very important 50-50, which is going to let me clear the front line entirely. This does use up all my credits because of the 4 op on the 5th Rangers, meaning that I can island hop in, but I can't get down another one of these units. I can also push Skytrain if I want to keep the front line clear.
I'm completely sure it wasn't a misclick. It
happened incredibly fast, and he proceeded to play the rest of the start incredibly fast. So he goes for the desperate measures. He fully clears the board.
I really would have liked to see feigned here.
And by this point, I was feeling very, very good about myself, because in my mind, I was thinking, if he had feigned, surely he would have played it by now. Surely he wouldn't have gone for the Shiden push-up at the very defensive move, the desperate and trade into the Skytrain, very defensive move, when he had the opportunity to play feigned. And here, my hopes and dreams were completely shattered.
I can see how.
And, I mean, we saw that the 4 tech cards that I put into this deck for this tournament, Island Hopping Research and the 2 M4A1s, I drew all 4 in this game, and none of them are, well, the research is pretty good here, because I can go for Penicillin, heal 6, and probably more important than the healing is the buff all of these units with +6.
Yeah, and the modern Jagro deck doesn't have as much burn as it once did. But still, the Zerato is going to find the bombing raid.
And I would have liked to see Zerato first. Here, I do think I made a slight mistake. The reason I played all 3 units next to each other was I don't want him to be bombing raid in face. However, I actually think in this situation I would want him to bombing raid face, just because my win condition here is really just relying on this Penicillin, making some unkillable units, and using those units to take control of the front line long enough to snowball out with island hopping, and rely on the fact that he doesn't have Shide and doesn't have Signal Regiment, meaning that being at 4 health, not the end of the world. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty crucial mistake that I made there.
I'm a little curious about not trading off Akita from Jinlun. I feel like it's just nicer to have the lower up cost units, and that little Yokosuka can provide a lot of pressure really quick when you get into the front line, especially when you're drawing cards each turn. You'll probably find some blitz Japan units to get out the attack.
But by this point, I don't think it frankly matters a whole lot because Xinlun finds 35T into 35T into Whirlwind, so he's going to be able to swing face for 11 this turn if he wants.
I imagine he does.
And he has 2 35Ts left in the deck, which if he can find one here, will just end the game immediately. He does not, so he is instead just going to drop me down to 2 health. And this just goes to show exactly what I was talking about before with if US Frontline does not have the frontline when you play Feint. If these 2/7s were in the frontline, this would be completely different because instead of hitting face for 10, these 2/7s trade 4 for 1 each. And that would just be the game completely changed on its head because suddenly I can do Hellcat 35T. We can do it, push up some more high health units, and he's very quickly running out of deck. But he has the front line. These 2/7s are in the support line, meaning they can only trade 1 for 1, one at a time, and one of them's even pinned. So this, I can technically survive on board, but that would require Xinlun not top decking 35T, or not 35T, not top decking Type 93. And also not playing any units to draw Type 93, because I think at this point he has 4 or 5 cards in his deck, and 2 of them are Type 93.
Yeah, it's crazy how the deck named Frontline is pretty important to hold the front line.
I actually do really like this play, I'd like to point out. I did 35T trade, and then we can do it, so that I would have another support line spot open to play a half-track or a Whirlwind to 35D of Red Devils. But of course...
that was pretty spicy. It's a shame it's wasted on this game.
Yeah. Xinlun, 4 damage on board, 2 Type 93s in deck, still doesn't find it after 2 draws. Or 3 draws.
You're telling me there's a chance.
But he finds it off the 4th draw. He finally gets the Type 93. I think there's 2 or 3 cards left in his deck at this point. And that is enough to close out the game. Xinlun takes it 1-0 in a very crucial game for me to win, because now I have to win frontline into pin if I want to take the series.
Good luck, buddy. It's definitely not unwinnable. This pin deck, I've played against it on ladder once in a game where they didn't find Monty or Shelling, and it was hilarious, and I won really easily. I was also on air, which is a far better matchup, but it can struggle with consistency sometimes.
And it is very difficult to play, is another thing. I would take a player on the pin deck over a player on Soviet France or self-damage any day of the week, because I think there's a lot more room for the player on the pin deck to just misplay. And I picked Jagro here because I know US is going to be the harder matchup, and I'm thinking if I can get a very easy win with Jagro here, and I think Jagro's a pretty favorable matchup, it could potentially put Xinlun on tilt. Just being in a 1-1 situation going into a disfavorable matchup, I feel like you're more likely to misplay than if you're up 1-0 and feeling confident coming off of a win. But turn 1 Pioneers going first is exactly what you want to see if you're Xinlun.
Yeah, this is a really nice hand here as well. The IG does do a little bit to play around these naval supports. Wait, no.
Naval operations.
Naval operation, thank you.
And this is
good. Ooh, Monty? Do you just rip an early Monty or do you save it? He's saying deal to 6 damage. I don't care. I've got a fort in hand. I feel like that's pretty reasonable, but I'm no expert on the deck.
This is one of those matchups where you are somewhat, well, significantly hurting your win rate because of these naval operations tech specifically for frontline. And in frontline, every single unit is a ground unit but Skytrain. However, if these naval operations were supply shipments, or not shipments, supply shortages, not only would it deal the 1 damage to the Aichi and still take out this cavalry regiment, it wouldn't pin the Befehlswagen, but it would then take out the Aichi on the following turn. So if these were supply shortages, this game might just essentially be as good as over. But they're not. They're naval operations. And, I mean, that's going to make them very good in the matchup in Game 3 if it goes to Game 3, but...
Granted, it's really good in this matchup, too. You just have the right tools to
naval operation certainly not a bad card against Jaguar. And here, he's playing it very slowly, and I do quite like this. You want to draw out more cards from your opponent. You can't just start playing naval operation every time there's a 1 health unit on the board. And this
you can. It goes 1 for 1.
This will draw out the bicycle regiment, so that will draw out 1 more unit. And that is likely going to be enough to bring out the naval operation. He could Suisse, pin the whole front line, naval power the Aichi. He could also just Monty.
Board lock seems nice as well. A delaying tactics, a Suse, and a naval power, maybe?
I mean, if you're going to Monty, you're going to want to Monty first. If you do delaying tactics, going for delaying tactics Suisse, you should Suisse first. Just goes for the naval operation. Because delaying tactics retreats them into the support line randomly, so if you get 2 and 2, then you can't actually pin everything.
That's a good point. I hadn't considered that. Okay.
So here...
Sorry. I will just say, I've watched Baron play this deck a few times. I can't say with certainty at any point what the right play was, but I know for a fact Baron von Glower would have played Suse, retreated them, and pinned the last one to get the board locked down.
Yeah, board lock is very powerful, and there's quite a few ways to do that, because if you do fully lock me in the support line, you then have the follow-up Monty to fully lock me in the support line a 2nd turn in a row. However, you don't have those Honeys and Crusaders that you want to be able to take advantage of the board being fully locked down.
In this situation, it looks like the earlier board lock would have been the best, I want to say.
Knowing that the Crusader coming off the top, absolutely.
But without that knowledge, harder to say, maybe?
Yeah. It is very difficult to say what the correct play is with this deck. And since there's not a whole lot for me to do on this turn, and if I recall correctly, I wait out most of my turn to make my opponent think I have Feigned Retreat and I'm contemplating playing it or not.
And now you pay the penance by having to wait through you just trying to mind game your opponent.
Yeah, it's never wrong to take an opportunity to feed your opponent false information about your hand. But I do want to talk about my previous turn, because I had the opportunity to play Key. However, playing Key, this is the surprise attack in hand. Very likely the Key just immediately gets removed. I'm trying to bait out the surprise attack before I play Key, since Jinlin only runs 2 Type 94s, and there's essentially no other way in his deck to kill Key. So if I see this first surprise attack comes out, this Key's going to get slammed. And playing the Whirlwind's a little risky. Getting it to the front line will stop this Suisse. Well, it will make the Suisse pinned if the Suisse comes out. However, having a Blitz tank is very useful at killing the Suisse if the Suisse comes out. So
can see another board lock this turn. The double Suisse.
That is true.
Instead for the naval operation, killing 2.
And this will drop him down to 8 cards in hand, meaning he doesn't have to worry about overdraw, but with 2 convoys and a Lend-Lease in hand, making this Crusader less useful. He definitely wants to find a Honey as soon as possible.
Also, not opting to trade into the Bomber first to get that second Aichi out and then pin, which I disagree with, to be honest with you. Especially if you're moving it up anyways.
Yeah, and here's a... It's very awkward that the Whirlwind is on this side of the Aichi, because I want to be able to play a Japanese unit, and then Yokosuka, trade the Yokosuka into the Crusader, but that's going to leave 3 units all adjacent to each other. Of course, the other Japanese unit in my hand, other than Ki, which I'm still not playing because I do want my opponent to play that surprise attack. I was really thinking my opponent would eventually play it on the Aichi. So instead, get the second Befehlswagen out. And maybe I do play Ki on this turn. The idea of potentially playing Ki on this turn is I've seen the Monty played. So if my opponent would need to pin the Ki, he can't do that with naval operation. And if I play it on the left, Suisei will be solely pinning Ki if he uses a Suisei to pin it. I decide to hold it back again.
I feel like Jinlun is really waiting to find these honeys in his deck to get these healings off the redeployment, but he might just need to play a redeployment just on its own, which is pretty sad. You are really trying to combo it with the honeys.
And the advantage of playing a redeployment in this situation would be that it removes the intel on the surprise attack, and it just shuffles it into your deck, meaning that you can have that at any point. Now, he obviously doesn't know that I'm holding a card back specifically because of the surprise attack, but that's definitely something you can theorize might be the case with these high-value cards like Ki and Shiden.
That looks like it's going to be a pretty high-value desperate measures here. Stranding the AA barrage in hand.
And it is pretty funny that to me that Jinlun plays around bombing raid excellently. However, it's not in my deck, so there was no need to do it. But does not.
But I appreciate the effort, anyways.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't hurt to practice your fundamentals. And he's starting to draw the larger units. If he can't win through Commonwealth, he can always just win through attacking face with Churchill 4 times in a row. However, this is kind of an awkward Churchill turn. And it's difficult to protect Sexton. And it's these turns that put people off of playing these pin decks, these types of pin decks. Because it's not that Jinlun is lost. Jinlun can still very easily win the game, whether units or it's through Commonwealths. However, this particular turn just feels very deep down like you were losing, and you don't want to have to make this decision.
I feel like you gotta pin the bomber, though, right? Just so that if you are killing off the Sexton with units, you're losing another unit, right?
I would agree with you. However, that is not what Jinlun does. Jinlun instead pins the Wirbelwind, allowing for the removal of this Sexton, just on board with the Befehlswagen and the Bomber. And, I mean, now he has 2 surprise attacks in hand, so this Ki can definitely not come out. And
Start a pin, though, which of course you don't know, but just from Jinlun's perspective, it's starting to get scary.
yeah.
That's not doing a whole lot without pin effects, the delaying tactics. Just a small roadblock for infantry right at the moment.
And the reason I do hold back the 35T there is because I know these honeys still have not been played, and I want a blitz tank to be able to hit into a high-value target in the support line from hand if he full pins my board. I believe this Seaforth, I will double-check this now, but I believe this Seaforth is the only guard in his deck, and it's a single copy.
I did notice that it's a single copy of Seaforth. I didn't check to make sure it's the only guard, however. Which
is
sometimes is a little bit of an issue, because if you only run one copy of guard, then your opponent might not have anything else to use the removal on, like a patrol or a Sendai, for example.
And crucially, often an overlooked element of this redeployment, however, something I'm sure Jinlun is very familiar with because of his time on the Japan Poland Legions deck, is the intel aspect of redeployment, showing that I have a key in hand. However, I've seen both surprise attacks shuffled back into deck, so they might be in hand, they might not be. I'll never know for the rest of the game if they are or are not in hand, so might as well play out the key.
So this turn makes a lot of interesting, brings up a lot of interesting questions for Jinlin, because he's going to want to redeployment for it with as many cards in hand as possible once you play it on these honeys, but you also probably need the AA barrage to send back the key, or at least something like a naval power.
If you keep the key on board, though, it will heal him 4.
That's true.
And that is exactly what he's going to do. He says, I don't need to retreat the key, I'm just going to redeployment for max heal. And
well, he still probably would want to play the AA barrage if he finds it, but it becomes okay if you don't find it, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, redeployment, how much did that just heal for? That healed for 12?
Pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, and then that's an additional 4 healing, so he's now just healed 16 plus the fortification. That's 23. Jinlin just healed 23 in a single turn. And if you're a Commonwealth deck, you want to be able to be pulling off turns like that. This is why this pin deck is never dead. Remember when he had that incredibly awkward turn like 4 or 5 turns ago? Well, suddenly he's at 39 cards, basically a full hand, or 39 health, basically a full hand, and is not taking on too much pressure on board, at least not too much pressure that he can't deal with.
And Jking could have gotten the draw from Errata there, but he would have had to take some pretty bad trades. And Jinmu's deck does have to play units, and it does not have any discard, so it's not a big risk holding it back and not getting the Change Retreat this turn.
There is that Type 93 offers honestly some of the most satisfying trades I have in Game of Cards. Not only it fully clears the void, takes out both honeys and the Seaforth, and drops him below the 30 health threshold. Now, I would have preferred if the Akita had hit the Pioneer Regiment, since I am technically dead to naval power Commonwealth at this point, which is what I am worried about. I'm just thinking, this game's over. I didn't hit the Pioneer, naval power Commonwealth, I'm done for. But as we see it from Jinlin's hand, there's no naval power.
Yeah, and no shelling either, which also would have been a huge card in this position.
So that is something that is very interesting. Jinlin does not run shelling in his deck.
What?
Yep.
That's no. Come on, man.
Yeah, Jinlin does not run shelling. Plays out the Suicide to pin down the fighters. And then he plays Avery.
That's the wrong order.
That is very much the wrong order, because not only does it pin the bomber, which might not matter.
Yeah,
well, it's going to matter, actually, quite a bit. But it also, seeing how the delaying tactics retreated the Whirlwind, he could have also pinned the Whirlwind while he was at it, which would have put me in a significantly worse position with a support line of a bomber and 3 pinned units. But instead, the Whirlwind moves up, and suddenly there's a spot to flood back into the front line.
He also did have the opportunity to destroy your key that turn, which I feel like is also a worthwhile consideration. Just to run you low on resources. Of course, he does see the errato. He knows you don't have bombing raid. You can get feigned retreat, but it means that this sort of pressure isn't coming out on this turn.
and I decided to just go face 6 here, drop him to 21. By this point, I could count the amount of healing left in his deck, and it's still quite a lot. It's still definitely more than 9. I think there's a Fortification, 2 AA Barrages, 102 Naval Powers, the Research, and the Honey. So more than enough healing to get back into Commonwealth range. However, you want to just be constantly dealing damage to your opponent, so instead of suddenly healing to 40, they're suddenly healing to 35, and suddenly you're in room where you can drop them back below 30.
How do you feel about this HQ hit versus something like destroying this Type 93 to bring down damage and to put a few more eggs into the Commonwealth game plan?
I think hitting the Type 93 was definitely the correct play, and by going face, I think this has essentially given me a way back into the game. I think if he had killed the Type 93, that's my second, if not my third. And the attack buff is what allows me to get through the heavy armor of the Avery, break back into the front line.
I think you made a mistake that turn. I don't say that often, but you attack with Akita last. If you attack with Akita second to last, you would gain a chance to hit the heavy armor Avery at 2 defense.
Yes, however, my idea is that doesn't really matter because all that gives me is it saves me a cavalry regiment, and a cavalry regiment is not going to be doing a whole lot. Whereas if I do it this way, there's the chance that it hits the pioneer, so I have to worry about a lot less. I don't have to worry about naval power or AA barrage plus Commonwealth. Or it hits the bomber, in which case, don't really care. Unfortunately for me, it hits the honey, which is by far the worst out of the 3, I believe. Although actually, I trade out the Type 93.
Well, worst out of the 4, you mean, right? Because HQ
yeah, but that might not actually be true. I think hitting the bomber might have been worse. But I'm once again dead to naval power Commonwealth, but Shinlin, unfortunately, once again does not have naval power Commonwealth. He has AA gun to Commonwealth, so he is 1 health off of lethal, which is not a sentence you say often.
That's just because you don't play this deck enough.
And he can retrieve the key, which he's likely going to want to do now with all 3 honeys down. And
does he not want to draw? Oh, how many cards does he have left in his deck?
I believe there is 2. There does not certainly not look like a lot of cards left in his deck. And he just goes Wellington face. And I'm not entirely convinced about playing this Crusader at all. I feel like you just put all your eggs in the top deck naval power and do naval power Commonwealth at basket, and my opponent hopefully doesn't hit me below 27.
Well, it kind of makes sense for like a Commonwealth play to be playing the Crusader early, but not so much with the game plan of getting the damage down into your HQ. I mean, feel like
I don't think he can win through damage to the HQ because he knows I have 2 fighters in hand, and he knows one of those fighters is going to be drawing the Feint if I don't already have it. So he knows for sure.
Oh, it was 1 card left, and it was the Lend-Lease. So not a... Huh. Yeah, well then...
Oh, I guess he played
I can't even really critique his play because
it was
didn't really have any options left.
He was completely out of healing by that point. And I was striking off cards as I played the game, so I would have realized that he had played the last naval power between the turn I was dead to naval power and that turn, which is something I did not notice just now in the cast. So by that point, I already would have been able to have scratched Commonwealth off the list of cards I have to be worried about, and it's just don't die to the units left in his deck. Which, unfortunately, he ended up not being able to surprise attack the key. He kept it around to draw him, to heal him, but because of that, he was not able to kill it, so it stopped the Wellington.
I like how you say, unfortunately, for everything that goes wrong for Jinlun, and right for you. It just feels a little strange. This is interesting. You don't really want to run out Panzer 35T into this. There is the naval operation risk here. It's not too big of an issue though to lose 2 units, but it would have given Jinlun tempo, which is
So
more important than value typically in this matchup.
my thought process was if he doesn't naval operation, I just do 99th and kill the honey.
Yep.
Which I'm very happy about. There's a very limited number of honeys in the deck. However, the amount of healing he can get off of honey is very much not limited. And if he played a naval operation, it would be a very low value, and I just immediately play Skytrain to start pumping out some of these US infantries, which would then allow a turn 4 35T 99th to take out the honey.
I like the Crusader here.
Yeah, Crusader naval power. You're feeling pretty safe. Obviously, it could be removed by double 35T, 35T second 99th, but you're not going to be playing around those.
Yeah, those aren't particularly realistic. And from his perspective, if you just move up these 2 infantry, he's able to play Susei. He is also able to use Susei on that to manage to keep around the Monty. I imagine if you're playing this honey, you're not playing the Susei because that opens you up to the risk of stars and stripes.
And this is Jinlun finding all of the pieces in game 3. And I mean, he got to all of the pieces eventually in game 2, but it wasn't quite as optimal of an order that in which he drew his deck. But here, it's looking very, very good. He's had all 3 honeys. He has the Monty, the Churchill, Commonwealth in hand, which can sometimes be a very bad thing if you are lacking draw. You don't want arguably the most dead card in your deck, but with all the draw you want, just having the Commonwealth guaranteed, meaning you're not going to go up to 40 health and then try to draw Commonwealth before your opponent eventually drops you back below 30. Things are looking up. I have to do double 35T, take out the honey, try to limit this healing. Now, obviously, I could have taken out the Crusader, but with the amount of just straight-up draw cards in his deck and the size of his hand, I didn't really think Crusader was much of a threat at this point relative to the honey.
I feel like it's... Jinlun doesn't play Ultra, right? No, we saw his entire deck last game. So I feel like playing this delaying tactics, even though it's very low value, the fact that it cycles right now with the Crusader on board makes me think that it's worth playing here.
Because my deck is so heavily infantry based, I think holding it back is fine here because it can essentially be used as a Monty effect later in the game of just sending back an entire board, or it can be combined with a card like Naval Operation to just fully lock me out of anything.
Yeah, if you get enough health on your guys, that is true. Yeah, it's hard to say versus value now versus value later. Good positioning from Jking here, putting the Red Devils in the middle so that if Jinlun wants to pin Alkri with a Susei, he has to spend an additional credit.
That was something that I was paying attention to. A very anal amount in this series was positioning for these Suisses. Because I think that the first time they changed Suisse to be the way that it is, there was a tournament game where I basically just completely buffooned my way into playing it directly into Suisse like several times in a row. And I did not want a repeat of that. So Jinlun playing out 3 units now, so Stars and Stripes does risk killing the Crusader. However, this Pioneers is safe, and this Pioneers is easily the most valuable unit on the board for him at the moment.
Yeah, and unfortunately, no Stars and Stripes or Strategic Bombing for Jking here, which would be very important cards. Jinlun also had the opportunity to play this retreat for the chance at top decking 1k pin to... Oh, man.
And that is one of the other advantages of holding on to the delaying tactics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is the ability to do delaying tactics Avery to just retreat my entire board to my hand. I overdrop Patrol, which is very useful at taking out this Pioneer or cleaning up a honey. However, Avery's not going to be quite as valuable as just, and once it's on the board, it's not going to be as valuable against Jaguar because it does get cleaned up very easily by a 5th Rangers if it's in the front line, or a Hellcat.
Yeah, I mean, you almost want him to use a little credits moving it up before you Hellcat it, save you some credits, and have him spend a few extra. But how do you have that happen? It's hard to say. You can move up an 8/8 5th Rangers, which is good into the board, but into the deck more generally, it's a little riskier with so many pin effects, and if he finds a Type 94...
So, my idea behind this was, I'm perfectly fine if it gets pinned. It's more to just, like, I want the support line. I want to hold the support line. And the Surprise Attack is the only card in this deck that accomplishes that. So, it does get punished by Surprise Attack. However, it would require playing another unit to potentially into a Stars, if he doesn't also push up the Avery, and if he does push up the Avery, I just take it out with Hellcat and go about my day. And, I mean, Jinlun taking some degree of risk, because if a Stars and Stripes comes out here, he is not quick enough to... well, no, that's not true. With Naval Operation and Suisse in hand, he's almost certainly quick enough to still be able to Commonwealth. However, 2 weakened Duets in my deck, and Commonwealth does not say win the game. Commonwealth says deal 20 damage. So if I'm able to heal up to 23, suddenly you need to actually deal any sort of damage. And his deck isn't running the daylight bombings like some of the credit denial variants of this deck. The only burst in his entire deck is Wellington, which is something that I have in mind, which is why I've been holding this Skytrain for so long, is basically by like turn 5 or 6, I was thinking this Skytrain is just going to be blocking Wellington. Because he doesn't really have a great way. Now, he can AA Barrage the Skytrain back to hand, but AA Barrage on Suisse means that the Skytrain can block a potential Wellington. However, this all is under the assumption that I'm able to find it. We can do it.
Why does that Commonwealth say 11k? Sorry, 13k.
I think that's just a visual bug in the spectating client. But yeah, for anyone confused why I half-tracked a Pioneer Regiment, 1, it forces an overdraw here, and 2, the Pioneer was reducing the cost of a potential Commonwealth in hand to 11, meaning he could play it on turn 11 rather than 12. So this does buy me another turn to 5 we can do it, or potentially overdraw Commonwealth.
Trading off seems a little strange to me, especially before playing out Radar. It almost feels like he's thinking a little too much about the danger of overdrawing now that you've done it once.
So in this situation, based on how he played that, I read that as he's worried about half-track on Pioneer, overdrawing Commonwealth, so he doesn't want to go up to 8 cards, so he sacked the Crusader first. And he's worried about me dropping him below 30 before he can Commonwealth, so he's going for a alternate win condition with the Bletchley Park. So I chose not to go for Sherman into potential we can do it to stay alive. I instead thought, I'm just going to push as much onto the board as possible so that I get these high-value 5th Rangers back when he Bletchley Parks. But unfortunately for me, this is just Commonwealth.
Wait, was that actually just a huge brain play from Jinlun? That his play puts Jking on the other direction? Because that's possible. Because I'm not really seeing the other reason to go for Bletchley Park there, other than mind games. Because it means you don't want to play Shermans, and you don't want to play We Can Do It's. Which is the main thing he wants to prevent in that situation.
Yeah,
I mean, I can't read minds, but if so, that is.
I think the idea is potentially that he can Bletchley Park after Commonwealth, if we can do it.
Yeah, that's also fair.
And that's going to stop a potential like Skytrade or just be pressuring him down before he can find Wellington. But either way, very good play from Jinlun in that last game, and he takes it 2-1, that pin deck, doing what it was intended to do, which was hard target in frontline.
I feel like we haven't seen a Commonwealth to win a tournament game in a minute or two.
The last one I remember is Evergarden using my Commonwealth to kill me. That's the last one that comes to mind.
That was a classic.
So slightly different scenario here where Jinlun's deck actually did what it was supposed to do and played his own Commonwealth to win the game. Fun seeing something different come up though, as much as I'm sure Jking, you would have liked that game to have gone a different direction. Always appreciate people bringing some new and slightly different off meta things and seeing success with them. So we're going to see Jinlun in the finals tomorrow. Jking, we'll see you as well in the third place game tomorrow. Thank you both for that thrilling cast, and we're going to take a quick break before we come back here and get our second semifinal on the way, where Moy will be taking on No5. Welcome back, everybody. It is time for the second semi-final. We've got No One taking on Moy, the winner of this, going on to the grand finals tomorrow to face Jinlun, the loser going into the third place match, which is not a gimme, going head to head with Jking. We got Bubbles, we got Flake back here to call all of the action. Bubbles, I know you're a big fan of like combo decks and fun stuff. How good did it feel seeing Commonwealth get pulled off in that last game?
It's certainly exciting when it happens. You know, we rarely see it. This is why I like it when there's specific players that like combo decks. You know, Baron von Goer, for example, he very much likes his combo decks, and I love to see it when they get pulled off and when they're executed properly. I'm excited to see if he can bring some sort of turbo Commonwealth deck next time. You know, something with some credit reduction or some ramp. I like the earlier the Commonwealth, the better. But it's certainly excited to see such an explosive sort of, I win the game, it's over, I'm done with this. It's sort of like slamming your hands down on the table. You're saying, look at my health, I've beaten you.
I definitely think, Flake, you've always been a big fan of just slamming things down on the desk and saying, I got this game, it's over.
Yes, that is quite the segue. I will do my best on this one, but Commonwealth has always been my favorite card in the game. When I'm just playing casually or just grinding ladder, I like to play like Britain, Italy, or any type of defense gaining deck, because it is fun. It is super satisfying when you do have that last ditch effort to just be like, cool board, but I just point click delete, and that's all it takes. It's such a good feeling. To see it in a tournament is just exceptional as well.
There is a saying though among Commonwealth players, which is your opponent will always your opponent's Commonwealth is always on their turn 12. That's when they draw it, and your Commonwealth is always the bottom card of the deck. You know, the card's placement in the deck depends on whether it's you or your opponent playing it. Naturally, that's generally how it goes. I thought the saying was something about slamming it on the desk, but we can move on from that. Multiple saying. Yeah, it's a important card. It's got a lot of baggage following it.
So, after all the awkward segues, let's just jump right into the second semifinals. Why don't we? Let's bring up the deck list here. We've seen both these players play before. Let's have Bubbles give us a quick run through of what Moy is bringing today.
So yeah, we've got USA mid-range or frontline, and it's kind of jumps between the two names. It just tries to take the front line and hold it for as long as possible. We do have this pattern, which was pointed out, and that can be quite an explosive combo. Then we've got Britair, nothing too crazy. Not Britair, sorry. This is... I will tell you something. When you look at Britair and you look at Pin at a glance view, they look almost identical. And this Susi, which some people do bring in Britair, really threw me off. So for a second there, I was like, I thought there was only one Pin deck. But no, yeah, Britair, a very common deck. We've all seen it. And I agree with Flake's opinion on Marmite. I have similar opinions about Britair. And then Soviet France, it's a very popular deck at the moment. A lot of people are starting to bring it. It's very good against this USA Germany deck.
Right on. So I think this is becoming a little bit more of the standard lineup we've seen in a lot of tournaments. Let's just jump quickly over to No One's side and get a quick overview this so we can jump right into the action.
So yeah, almost identical. You've got the Brit Air and you've got the USA frontline, and then you do have this Soviet USA deck. Which we spoke about before being a little bit better in the Soviet mirror. And we did see that come to light in the game against Head, where Head tried to pressure lethal and no one was able to sort of play a little bit of a longer game and out-resource Head. And interestingly enough, this is the exact same 3 decks for Noah. Noah played against Brit Air, USA Frontline, and I believe these were the 3 decks anyway that he faced last round, and now he's facing up against, once again, these 3 decks. Is going to be very much, a bit of deja vu here for Noah.
Noah heard Flake say War Machine is boring and said, you know what? I'm going to bring 4 of them and I'm going to win some games with them.
Hey, he's there, I'm not. That's the difference, right? My opinion is completely garbage. That's just the way it goes. That's why I am the big mouth and they are the big brains. That's the line in the sand that they've drawn.
Pretty spot on. What are we thinking for bans, Bubbles?
I think it's going to be, the classic Brit Air story. You see Brit Air, you ban Brit Air. It's a very much, monkey see, monkey do sort of type situation. You come into these tournaments, you don't ban Brit Air because you think, I'm going to do something else. You get beaten by Brit Air, so you get in line, ban Brit Air. It's as simple as.
Is that usually your thought process too, Flake? If you're going into an event, you say, hey, I'm just going to line my deck up to target something and to know I'm pretty much always going to ban something, and that ban something is almost always Brit Air.
That's the way to go. Either you target a particular deck and just make sure that it doesn't win, in this particular case, if it's Brit Air. If you've got 3 decks that can just take it out and you know your opponent's going to bring it, you let it go. And then you say, you're not winning with this deck, and that's the end of the story. Otherwise, you just say, well, if I have no confidence in the lineup that I'm bringing to actually reliably beat this particular monster, then I'm just going to ban it outright and rely on the other things, and it seems to be that's the way. Whenever there's a particular deck that just consistently gets banned, it's because there's no remedy that is relied on, and it's not just about having one remedy. If you have one deck that can beat it, that's fine. That's no problem, but you need 2 decks that can beat it, and right now that doesn't exist apparently, so the best way to do it is just outright just slam it with the X and move on.
The Bubbles point, you can say I'm going to target it, but it just still has a very solid chance of beating you. So let's take a look at the bans and find out if they went ahead. And oh, shocker, it is Britain banned on both sides. We're going to go into this best of 3 with both Soviet and US lists here ready to go as we jump into game 1. Of Noah versus Moy, the second semifinals here in the April OCC.
All right, so Noah bringing in that Soviet list. It's going to be the USA on Moy's side. What are you looking for here, Bubbles, on this aggressive mulligan? There's going to be a lot of those 1-drops. You've got the engineers, the engineer battalion. That's got to be a good start. But what's the ideal opener here for either player?
I mean, for Noah, you're looking for things that are going to store the game or things that are going to help you reach the late game quicker. So things like War Machine, these 5th Rangers are quite good, just things to help you have an early game say in what's happening so you can reach the tipping point where your card value outweighs the front line. And then for this frontline deck, you mentioned the engineers, that's quite good at putting on a lot of pressure. Any strong 1-drops, you can't rely on 32nd Infantry, the chocolate boys that draw themselves out your deck quite as much as you can in other matchups, because in this matchup there's stuff like Winter Warfare and these bloody sickles. Really, if you can get a Red Devils in the front line, that's really dominant. But the other thing you're actually looking for is some marathon tools. I know last time there was a bit of a sprint in this matchup, but generally it's a bit more of a marathon matchup. So things like these 5th Rangers, these M4 Shermans, We Can Do It, these sort of cards are actually quite relevant in this matchup, and you're happy to find them quite early on. This Red Devils, which I said before, finding that for Uemoyu is they're in a really strong position now. They've got the Sherman, they've got the Red Devils. They're just in a great position.
507th is finally just giving a little bit of love to its fellow man here, as it did to sort of sprinkle a little love on itself earlier on. Good thing it did, actually, because no one went ahead and just double tapped and got rid of the backline here. Bloody Sickle again, trying to do some work here and dropping in with another another guard here. Now that engineer in the back line is under smoke screen. You cannot touch it, you cannot interact with it unless you've got an order that can point, click, delete. But it looks like this USA front line living up to its name as a 4-4, opting for the 0 operating cost other than the +4/+4. But it's got blitz. That thing can run to the front line in a hurry here. There's no reason why you're keeping that in the back line, I would imagine.
There's not much reason. I do believe no one is running these confusions, so you might be worried about your peer, your forcer in the front line being confusioned and then traded into it. So I could see Umoi trying to play around that. But if you're particularly worried about that, then you should have gone for the M4 Sherman. Playing the 5th Rangers and you know, having this 4-4 into the front line that you can use repeatedly because of its op cost is an active thing. You need to be active with this. If you were going to play around the confusion, then you should have gone for the Sherman.
They're responding with their own, dropping the 4-4 with the blitz, trading up. Still the 507th gaining lots of love here, but that's not a trade you want to make into that guard. It is going to trade it outright. I think that it's not as clean cut as it were. This is the kind of trap that players who don't read cards will likely fall into because it looks like the easiest trade in the world, but that is not what you want to do here.
And we see this patrol now. This is going to be able to remove guard from the guard, obviously, but then also remove its destruction effect. So it's essentially going to become a 0-4, you know, taking the 2 damage with no guard and no destruction effect. It's essentially a body that has no meaning, you know, much. And here we see possibly the We Can Do It coming out.
Yeah, We Can Do It's going to help things out. It's also going to facilitate the trade here. In the follow-up that can be made here, which will keep the 507th alive. There was an opportunity for no one to actually make the trade into the 507th and actually clean it up, but he opted rather to go with the war bonds and ramp up as fast as possible. Was that the correct play in terms of the amount of pressure that he's facing right now?
I think based on having cards like Partisans in hand, as well as these late game cards like the B17, and then obviously the 5th Rangers can double as a late game card when you make it an 8/8. I think it makes a lot of sense for Neon to play this slower route and try and get to the late game a little bit quicker instead of dealing with the board. You know, you can say, okay, Moi, you've got a board, but you've got to do something with it. I'm going to try and accelerate my game to the point where I can just out-resource you and I out-value you. And we also see Noan having a lot of health. I think if Noan was a lot lower on health, then there might be more stress to you know, start to deal with things, maybe put down some guards or the 5th Rangers with 0 op cost. But because of this high health pool and like the cards you see available, like the B17 and the Partisan, it makes it more of a correct call and a more, you know, appealing route to go down.
5th Rangers going in with the boost and the tickle to make that trade there. It's an 8-3 in the back line. Still pretty hefty at 4 operating cost, but it was a trade it had to make because it is also establishing a pretty decent body on the board. But yeah, those engineers gave no one a little bit of extra cushion, as it were. But the other thing here is those 32nd infantry regiments are polluting the board, making that flying battalion, the flying fortress, a lot worse. And now, not only that, they're all 3-4s. Like, they just got really confident in a hurry. 3-4s that can thin out the deck like that. Like, they got really, really nasty in a hurry. They're going to trade up really nicely with the 5th.
And also with this Blitzkrieg in hand, they are a threat on their own, but they can also be a win con. These can end the game on just on their own with these Blitzkriegs, especially if you can find double Blitzkrieg. You could have 2 or 3 of these in the front line, and it doesn't really matter how much health Neon has, because each of your units is going to have 10 plus attack, and is just going to absolutely wipe the slate with everything.
All right, dropping in a guard and a war machine. He's well ahead on credits, but way behind on board.
We'll probably see the patrol come out soon. You can go for the patrol plus Blitzkrieg, and if my maths is correct, that should just be the game on the spot.
My goodness, in a heartbeat. Look at that again. Patrol just getting rid of the guard, and it's free and clear. Clearance to land there as everybody connects with the HQ. Quick work done there by Moi.
And that's where these That's where these blitzkrieg's come in really, really useful. You know, these sort of scenarios where your opponent feels cushy, they feel comfortable, they feel like they've got a nice health range, and then you just, you know, you patrol a guard and you blitzkrieg. And what was previously, you know, a non-threat, maybe a 1-3 Greyhound or a 30-second infantry, becomes such a terrifying threat on its own. And when your opponent, even if they only have just 1 or 2 blitzkrieg in the deck, you need to constantly be thinking about it.
An aggressive mulligan there by Noah. Opted initially to keep the to toss the War Machine, and kept it ultimately, and gets rewarded a 329th as a 1-drop, followed by the ramp up. Feels good. He's going second here, so getting that front line for Moy. Well, not with that hand, unfortunately. It looks like everything's coming up Noah here. He's finding the right curve, and if nothing hits the board, you're just ramping up and feeling like a boss.
Spiring could potentially be very useful this game, offering Moy the opportunity to eventually go for nukes. No one funding the second Ural factory is really not what you want to see. It is very powerful when used alongside partisans, and obviously it can be powerful along confusion, but not particularly so in this matchup. So finding 2 of them, really not what you're looking for in this matchup.
The arms race is on. Looks like both players are, one's rolling down the ramp train, the other is just hitting the books and doing all the research. And USA getting all the way down to, like you said, Manhattan Project ×2, just nuking the board. And the brilliant part about that whole play, Bubbles, is that the 6 damage from the Manhattan Project will also hit the HQ. So that's another option to bust through some of these guards and actually finish out and close out a game.
We've seen them going for the Joseph Stalin here. I imagine the main decision was between the Naval Brigade and the Joseph Stalin. And going for the Stalin sort of communicates a lot about how Neon wants to be playing this game. He wants to go really, really super late game to the point where deploying a 10k unit is a viable turn and a viable option. Generally, this card is best against things like Germany, where they have cards like Leopold that are going to bounce your board. This is a really good counter, so it's not particularly amazing in this matchup. Moy has a lot of removal, a lot of ways of dealing with it, but even if it's not the perfect matchup for it, it just communicates a lot about how no one wants to be playing this map.
Another Bloody Sickle. Finding the hammer. That's a great pickup over there to go ahead and deal with the Rima in the back line. Again, that's a problematic card, and it's not just the guard, it's the mobilization that it'll give. It becomes a problem. It feels like just this constant buzzing, but it gets met with another one. So one problem just becomes another Bloody Sickle from Noan.
I'm almost surprised we didn't see the Rifle Regiment come out, the 39th Rifles, because this lets you take control of a unit with 2 cost or less. You could take the Engineers, and that's probably the highest value target in this matchup. You can take the Brilliance Irregulars, you can take Chikers and things, but really, taking control of this Engineers just gives you so much room to so much health to move about and do this research instead. So I'm a little bit surprised we didn't see come out this turn.
What a nice little just trade up here again. Your Owl factories just killing your opponent's unit that you just lured to your own side, and the destruction effect, dropping another body. That was a 3-for-1, which is incredible.
It's such a potent combo when you target a high value unit. A lot of players can be baited into waiting for this 270-second, which spawns in a Joseph Stalin on death. The issue of that is the Soviet deck will almost never play that raw. The Soviet deck will play that in unison with Red Banner. So as much as you may be tempted to wait and take control of this, super high value unit, your opponent is almost never going to be quite so careless with that unit.
To a degree, I would imagine no one is aware that Manhattan Project is a late game issue, issue that you have to sort of keep in your back pocket. So I would suspect that actually just rushing down and try to create as much pressure as possible early on could sort of dictate how Moy plays, and maybe opting to develop board and answer targets versus progressing the research line. That could be an option here. As the Bloody Sickle just looking for a target here, what does it want to deal with? Again, taking out and dealing with mobilization, but that's a huge pickup. Stars and Stripes can find a nice hefty amount of targets in the back line, and if you want to trade the tank in to the Rima, you can just clean up everything here.
I think maybe you even, as well as trading into the Rima, you may want to trade into the Chika, because then you take 1 return damage. If you go for this first, you now have to take 2 return damage if you ever want to trade into that.
Thinking here. That was
Now,
a massive pickup.
The question is, do you want this 2-4 in the front line? Do you want to keep this on board? Or do you want to trade it away and get the T-34 out of it? No one opting to keep it on board. Try and get a little bit more value out of it first. Sickle on the Yak.
It's been back and forth here. Typically, these Soviet matchups are the amount of destruction, the amount of just wreckage on the board is incredible.
And this is very much what we can expect from the research. You generally play it on turn 8 because it costs 9 credits to do the next step. So if you play it on turn 8, you can then go straight into developing nukes on turn 9. But with this Joseph Stalin coming out, it's saying, hey, if you want to develop these nukes, I'm going to kill you before you can properly use them. However, we can see Uwumoi, if he wants, just instantly kill this Joseph Stalin. You can go for a defend in depth to damage it, and then you can go for a naval to finish it off. So it'll be very interesting to see. Goes for the Manhattan projects instead. Is going to forfeit a lot of health in return.
Well, this is an opportunity. No one knows what's down the line. Sees both nukes, and this is a situation where you just got to basically cash in your chips while you can. As look at the amount of damage that's going to be leaking through over here. It's a risky gambit for Moy to go ahead and progress the research, get a couple of nukes in his back pocket. He can only really fire off 1, and that Joseph Stalin is still going to be on the board.
It's very much going to force Uwumoi to, most likely fire off 1 nuke, because obviously there's going to be a lot of residue left over with the T-34 that you get into hand. But also spend some more resources and deal with the Joseph Stalin. It just depends whether you want to use, your naval or whether you want to use one of these defend depths to finish it off. But I'd be, Uwumoi has to kill this Joseph Stalin. So it means they have to use more than just a nuke to do so.
That is a very pivotal part of this actual game here, was on that turn 9, that Joseph Stalin coming out, like you mentioned. It's all right, do I progress this research and just take it off the chin and see what happens? But we'll see if this pays off, as Moy right now took a beating in order to develop that research. Here's the first wave of nuclear nonsense, as he's kind of hovering over it. I don't know whether he likes the left one or the right one. Which one would you go for? It looks like the right one.
Just thinking about it. No need to rush. Gonna go for the defend in depth. Now, something worth keeping an eye on is not only does Noan have this T-34, Noan also has this Partisans. So Noan can take control of something scary and use it to lethal. If this ISU is ever on board and the HQ isn't guarded, you can take control of that and hit the HQ of it, which could potentially close out the game, especially considering that Uwumoi can go down to 6 health if no one wants.
Incredible how this just turned in a heartbeat. Again, the steadfast resolve of Moy to just stare down an 8-8 tank with heavy armor 2 and say, that's cool, I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to go to school and learn. But the pressure's on right now. Blitzing in for another 5. Moy now at 6 defense on his HQ. No one at 11. Throws down the guard, but knows that his time on Earth is fleeting, because there's another Manhattan project that can be ripped right now to go ahead and clear the board of threats, dealing another 6 to the HQ, which puts him way ahead. This in conjunction with another 2 from the fighter in the back line.
And the mobile defense, this is threatening lethal now. Uwumoi is saying, you need to do something. You're on 3 health, and I have 2 units with 3 attack and a unit with 2 attack just to get you that little bit lower. Going for the first rifles, as well as the war machine.
All right, going up to 13 credits. You could have 1,000,000 credits, but if you're staring down lethal, you have to have an answer in your hand. It doesn't matter how much it costs at this rate. You can throw it down.
I believe this is game now. You go for this defend in depth, take out the 3-5, trade 2 of your things into the residue guard, and then finish off the game.
Beautifully executed. Look at this. Just like that, staring down lethal in a very grave circumstance and opting to hit the books and learn. It goes down the Manhattan Project route in the face of a nasty gargantuan tank, takes the damage and turns the corner. What a match. Again, that was a brilliant execution there by Moy on that matchup, just to, again, to have the cojones to say, that's cool, I'm still going to learn.
I mean, Moy really did some just beautiful, excellent footwork in both those games. It felt almost decisive that Moy was just ahead in all of these situations, and it felt like no one who is generally considered one of the best cards players of all time was just playing catch up the whole time. And it was, how do I deal with Moy's threats? Every single game, Moy was presenting the threats, and no one was answering or trying to answer them. And generally, in anything, competitive, you want to be the one pushing forward, and you want your opponent to having to be finding solutions to it. And, when they can't find those solutions, you 2-0 them.
That kind of goes back to what you were saying about Jking's strategy as well, right? If the person is feeling the pressure from their opponent, they are more likely to make those mistakes. You are forcing them to not only make the right plays, but also find the answers. And I think that just goes to show that, to your point, Bubbles, we expect that from Jking. We expect that from Noen. Players like Moy and Jinlin, who are still exceptional cards players, you haven't seen them as much. You don't know what level they're at, and seeing Moy play those 2 games against one of the top players in cards, executing exceptionally, was really impressive. Not to mention the fact that now we've got Noen versus Jking, and if I told you that you'd be seeing Noen versus Jking on Sunday at the beginning of the event, you probably would have said, hey, that's my finals. That is in fact the 3rd place match. Jinlin versus Moy going to be going head to head in the grand finals, which I think is going to be a phenomenal way for one of those 2 players to build up some momentum before next week's Ultimate.
I think you also get a lot of bragging rights, sort of, even if you've got, at this point, you've got the points, you're comfortable. I think Moy's going to be very comfortable now. He's reached the final. His points, I'm pretty sure he's now guaranteed. But at that point, the bragging rights of, I beat Noen 5, I beat with these players in this tournament. And I think, the confidence, like you said, that you gain from that, I know from when I used to play competitively, so much of it was about confidence. If I went into a match thinking, I've got this, I'm going to beat this guy, my chances of actually beating them went way up. People think it's just maths, it's just numbers, it's just theory, but your decisions are affected so much by your confidence, and there's a difference between playing to win and playing not to lose. And high confidence players play to win, low confidence players play not to lose.
You're basically treating this, any time that there's a, this isn't like, this particular tournament is not the top of the echelon, right? And it's the same way that somebody is going to say, well, are you ever going to have one of these competitors not try their hardest at a particular tournament? This might be a primer for it, but it's still a good experience. It's still something on the bet. Nobody is going into this tournament half-assing it. It's like going to a national championship and saying, no, my eyes are on Worlds. Who cares about this? You're winning you want to win every step of the way. So you always take it seriously. And part of prep is playing against the best in the world in tournament conditions. And that's what you have over here. This is frankly the best opportunity that they have to prepare for something bigger, better, nastier down the road. So I suspect that these there's nothing lost when you're preparing for these tournaments, and you're going to get one hell of a show.
Playing in a tournament setting against the best in the world is exactly what we're going to get tomorrow when we get into both the 3rd place match and the finals. We've got Moy taking on Jinlin. We've got Noen versus Jking. It's going to be a huge day. Tune in tomorrow for the grand finals of the April OCC.